The night 3 of my coworkers set me up on a blind date with my boss's daughter, purely as a joke at my expense. I had no idea I was the only person at that table who hadn't already worked out how the evening was going to end. I expected an hour of excruciating small talk and a story I'd tell at my own retirement party. What I got was a woman who'd chosen the restaurant herself, who'd already decided where we were sitting before the host could ask, and who looked. When the joke finally got revealed somewhere around the appetizers, less like someone who'd been ambushed, and more like a person checking an item off a list she'd written days earlier. She ordered for both of us before I'd opened the menu. I should have found that alarming. I found it the opposite. My name is Marcus Bell. I'm 32. I write technical documentation for a structural engineering firm, assembly manuals and safety procedures. The unglamorous paperwork that keeps a building standing after the architects and engineers move on to the next one. I'd been eating dinner alone at my kitchen counter, standing up, for long enough that sitting down at a real table with an actual place setting felt like a faintly foreign experience by the time any of this started. Her name was Alana Voss, 29, an event planner who ran her own small company. The kind of person whose job was to make other people's evenings look effortless by spending months in advance making sure nothing visibly went wrong. She carried a slim leather planner everywhere, color-coded tabs by some system I never did fully decode, into a casual Tuesday dinner the way other people carry their phone. There was always a small smudge of ink along the side of her right hand from a fountain pen she refused to give up despite owning, by her own later admission, 4 perfectly functional ballpoints. She finished her own sentences before anyone could interrupt them, a habit from running meetings where nobody else would. She asked the real question right after the small one. The way people who plan events for a living learn to get the actual answer out of clients who don't yet know what they want. We'd met the year before at her father's holiday party, where I'd spent 40 minutes failing to fix a jam projector while she silently handed me a screwdriver from her bag, then disappeared back into the crowd before I could properly thank her. I worked for her father. That fact had functioned for the better part of a year as a door I didn't try to open, even though nobody had ever actually told me it was locked. She told herself, she admitted much later, that her silence on the matter was professional courtesy, not wanting to complicate things for one of her father's employees. By her own account, that explanation accounted for roughly 30% of the truth. I should say, for the record, that I am not a man who moves quickly toward anything. I notice details and sit on them for entirely too long before acting, a habit a college roommate once called either patience or cowardice, depending on his mood that week. I'm not unfriendly. I just default to careful, which from a distance can look a great deal like indifference, even when it isn't. Alina was not careful in that particular way. She was the fastest thinker in nearly every room she entered, quick enough that strangers sometimes mistook it for coldness rather than what it actually was, which was attention she hadn't yet decided to spend on you. She had a habit, I noticed over the following weeks, without admitting I'd noticed, of capping and uncapping that fountain pen in the half-second before she said something she actually meant, as though she needed her hands occupied for it. The bar smelled like rosemary and citrus peel from whatever was being muddled behind the counter, and the restaurant had the kind of low gold lighting that makes everyone look slightly more interesting than they actually are. 2 of my coworkers, Dana and Sam, had spent a solid month building up the idea of this date in the office group chat, framed to me as a low-stakes setup with a friend of Dana's cousin, a woman I'd never met, who supposedly worked in events. I should have asked more questions about that phrasing. I did not. Because by the time the reservation rolled around, I was mostly just relieved someone had taken the decision of dating off my hands for one evening. Dana had insisted on driving me there herself, ostensibly for moral support. Though in retrospect that was almost certainly so neither of us could back out, and Sam had shown up 20 minutes early to claim the table next to ours under the thin pretense of a coincidental dinner with his own girlfriend. I recognized her the second she sat down, from a framed photo in the firm's lobby of an anniversary gala 2 years back, and the recognition arrived roughly 4 seconds before Dana's face did the exact same thing from across the table, followed by Sam choking very quietly on an ice cube. Elena watched the two of them go pale with the patience of someone who had clearly been expecting this exact reaction, set her menu down without urgency, and said, "Took you all long enough to figure it out." Donna started apologizing immediately, the words tripping over each other, something about a friend of a friend who must have given her the wrong number, and Sam kept glancing toward the door like he was calculating the fastest route to it. I had never once seen anyone absorb being the punchline of somebody else's joke and somehow end up holding every card in the room anyway. "You knew," I said to her, mostly to confirm it out loud, since my coworkers seemed temporarily incapable of forming sentences. "I knew the moment Dana asked my assistant for a restaurant recommendation," she said, not unkindly, and didn't think to ask why I was so interested in the answer. Donna mumbled something about a mix-up. Sam offered to get the check immediately and leave. Elena told them both, not unkindly, that they were welcome to go and that Marcus and I will be staying, in a tone that left no real room for negotiation, and something about the easy certainty in that sentence sat slightly wrong with me for the rest of the night. In the specific way of a sentence that means more than it appears to. Once Dana and Sam had gone, mortified, into the night, Elena and I stayed long enough to actually order food, and the conversation that followed was easier than any first conversation I'd had in years. Easy enough that the hour got away from both of us without either noticing. Outside, waiting for our separate cars, she handed me a business card from her planner with nothing on the back but a small, deliberate pause before she said, "For when the firm needs an event planner. Strictly professional." I told her I'd keep it filed appropriately. Neither of us believed that was the only reason she'd handed it over, and neither of us said so. By the following week, I had filed the entire evening away as an excellent story. The kind I'd tell at parties for years, nothing more than that. I told myself it had been a strange, funny dinner with my boss's daughter. The sort of thing that happens once and becomes an anecdote rather than a beginning. That is not self-awareness. That is self-awareness wearing a trench coat, and I built it carefully anyway, even while noticing that I was thinking about the specific way she'd said we will be staying far more often than one dinner should justify. Long enough that I started rereading her texts about logistics for a department lunch she was coordinating. Long enough that I began finding reasons to walk past the conference room when I knew she was meeting with my boss, which, in an office with exactly one conference room, was not the subtle maneuver I believed it to be at the time. Long enough that I eventually had to admit the shelf I'd built wasn't holding the weight I'd put on it, and hadn't been for a while. I was 32 years old, and apparently still fully capable of lying to myself with the diligence of someone half that age, and I want to be clear that I knew it the entire time. Knowing did not stop me. It just turned the eventual admission into less of a discovery and more of an overdue paperwork filing, the kind you keep meaning to get to, and then suddenly can't avoid any longer. The first real crack came 3 weeks later, when the firm hired her company to run its annual anniversary gala, and I got assigned to handle the audio-visual setup, which meant a full week of run-throughs in the same room as her, color-coded planner and all. On the second day she remembered, unprompted, that I drank my coffee black, except on bad mornings, when I added too much sugar and pretended I hadn't. I had mentioned that exactly once, at dinner, 3 weeks earlier, in passing. I did not bring this up. I instead reorganized the cable bin in the Av closet, with a thoroughness it did not require. This is not a skill I'm proud of. It is, evidently, one I have. 2 days after that, her assistant called over to ask Alana something about table assignments, and Alana answered without looking up from her planner, "Put Marcus near the front. He hates not being able to see the screen he built," which was true, and which she had no obvious professional reason to know, let alone factor into seating logic for a corporate gala. That same week I caught a glimpse of the planner itself, left open on a table during a coffee break. Tabs labeled in her neat slanted handwriting, vendors, timeline, contingencies, and one smaller tab near the back, unlabeled. That I only recognized because the page peeking out from under it had my name written at the top, underlined twice, with nothing else on the page yet. She closed the planner before I could see anything more. Neither of us mentioned it. I thought about that blank page under my own name for the rest of the afternoon. On the 4th day of run-throughs, my boss stopped by to check on the setup and made some offhand joke about hoping the AV system held up better than his projector had at last year's holiday party, and Elena, without missing a beat, said she had complete confidence in the technical writer who'd fixed it. Richard Voss looked between the two of us with the mild, unfocused curiosity of a man who hadn't yet connected any dots, and walked off satisfied. Alana did not look at me afterward. I did not look at her either. We both very deliberately found something else in the room that required our immediate attention. I overheard her on the phone with her assistant later that same day, rescheduling a long weekend trip she'd apparently had booked for months, something about a friend's engagement party 2 states away. "I know," she was saying, half distracted, scrolling through something on her laptop. "I just don't want to be out of town for the run-throughs this week. We can move it." Her assistant, audibly, asked why a corporate gala mattered more than a friend's engagement party, and Elena didn't answer that part at all. Just said she'd explain later and hung up. I had no professional reason to know the run-throughs in question were the ones I'd been assigned to. I knew it anyway, the way you know things you've been quietly keeping score of without admitting you were keeping score. On the night before the gala, we were both staying late running sound checks, and when the speaker feedback shrieked unexpectedly, she flinched and grabbed my arm to steady herself, then let go of it almost immediately, 2 shades more color in her face than the lighting could explain. I had never seen her flustered in 3 weeks of watching her run an entire event company out of one leather planner. I offered her a very long, very unnecessary explanation of feedback loops and PA systems, because it was apparently the kind of mercy we were both willing to extend each other that week. The mercy of pretending not to notice exactly what we'd both just noticed. The gala itself ran until nearly midnight, and by the time the last guests filtered out, most of the staff had gone home, leaving the two of us folding chairs and coiling cable in a ballroom that smelled like spent candle wax and crushed flower petals from the centerpieces. We didn't talk much while we worked. The room had emptied out into a kind of hush that felt different from silence. The particular quiet of a space built for 200 people now holding only 2, the string lights still half lit overhead because neither of us had gotten around to the breaker yet. Somewhere down the hall, a service elevator chimed and closed again, the building settling into its after-hours rhythm around us. She knelt to gather the centerpiece candles into a crate, and I watched her work for longer than the task required. The careful, economical way she moved through a room she'd spent 6 months planning down to the napkin folds. The same attentiveness she'd given that jammed projector a year earlier. Only now I wasn't pretending not to notice it. I picked up the loose chairs in slow, unnecessary order, in no particular hurry to reach the end of the cleanup, and if she noticed how long I was taking, she didn't say anything about it either. "I told my dad I had a vendor emergency tonight," she said eventually, not looking up from the crate. That wasn't entirely a lie. I just didn't mention which vendor. I didn't answer right away. My body had opinions before my brain finished processing them, the way it tends to. "I'm not going to ask what that means," I said, "because I think I already know, and I'd rather hear the rest of it from you somewhere that isn't a room full of leftover candle wax." She looked up at that, something amused and unguarded crossing her face before she could organize it back into composure. And for a moment, neither of us moved to break the look, which somehow felt like doing something enormous. 3 nights later, after the gala invoices were settled and there was no professional reason left for either of us to be in the same room, she showed up at the door of my apartment with the planner under her arm, like she needed something to hold on to for what she was about to say. She hadn't called ahead, which I would learn later was almost entirely out of character for a woman who scheduled everything, including, on one memorable occasion, her own lunch breaks. "That blank page with your name on it," she said, "before I'd even gotten the door fully open. I made that tab the week after your projector. I didn't know what to put on it yet. I still don't. Entirely. I just knew I wanted there to be a page." I went still. Not dramatically, just inwardly still, the way a room goes quiet right before someone finally says the thing the whole evening has been circling without naming. "You don't have to fill it in tonight," I told her. "We can leave this exactly where it is. I'll go back to being your father's technical writer, and you'll go back to being the person who handed me a screwdriver once and vanished. Nobody has to know there was ever a page." She didn't take it. She didn't even pause long enough to make it look like she'd considered taking it. "I don't want to leave it blank anymore," she said. "I've been carrying it around for over a year. That's a long time to keep not writing anything down." So I told her the version I'd spent 3 weeks building careful shelves to avoid saying out loud. "Every project update I've gotten good news on since that dinner. You're the first person I've wanted to tell," I said. I told myself it was because you ran the gala logistics. It was never about the gala logistics. I've been finding reasons to walk past your meetings with my own boss like a man with absolutely no shame, and I have a fair amount of shame about most other things. I think I have known since the projector. I just didn't have anywhere to put it that didn't feel like overstepping." She was quiet for a moment, turning the torn page over once in her hands, like she was checking it for something written on the back that wasn't actually there. She laughed at that. The real kind, not the practiced event planner kind, and reached into the planner, tore the blank tabbed page free, and held it out to me instead of writing on it herself. "You finish it," she said. "I've planned enough things this year. I'd like this one to be a surprise." Her phone buzzed in her bag at exactly that moment. Her father's ringtone of all things, loud and completely wrong for the moment. And we both laughed before either of us could stop it. The kind of laugh that breaks a held breath open. She silenced it without looking, and I kissed her there in my own doorway. Careful and unhurried, the kind of thing 2 people do when they've both finally stopped offering each other exits. When we broke apart, she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen once across 3 weeks of perfectly managed professional composure. "If my father asks," she said, voice still a little unsteady, "we are absolutely not telling him this started with a prank." This time, we both knew exactly what she meant. And it had very little to do with keeping a secret, and everything to do with not yet being ready to share something that still felt entirely, newly theirs. 6 weeks later, her father found out anyway, the way fathers generally do, and took it with the particular blend of suspicion and reluctant approval available only to a man realizing his own employee has been quietly devoted to his daughter since a holiday party he barely remembers hosting. Dana and Sam, for their part, have never once let either of us forget that the whole thing was, technically, their idea, a claim Elena disputes on the grounds that she'd already decided to attend that dinner before either of them finished planning the joke. Dana now introduces herself at company events as the one who set them up, a title she has fully claimed and shows no signs of relinquishing, accuracy notwithstanding. I have stopped correcting her. It is not a fight worth winning. By the time autumn came around, the careful part had mostly worn off. The blank tab in her planner has my handwriting in it now, just 3 words, nothing more. Because she told me once that the best plans leave room to be revised. She still corrects my grammar in emails before I send them. I still pretend, unconvincingly, that I mind. She has started leaving her fountain pen at my apartment on purpose, I'm fairly sure, as an excuse that requires no actual excuse, since by then we'd both stopped pretending we needed one. Richard, for his part, has taken to introducing me at firm events as Marcus, who fixed my projector. A sentence that always gets a bigger laugh than he intends, mostly because Elena and I are the only 2 people in the room who understand exactly how much that sentence is actually doing. A year on, when people ask how it started, Dana tells it as a prank that went sideways, which is technically true and almost entirely beside the point. Elena tells it as a screwdriver and a jammed projector, which gets closer, but still leaves out the part where she'd been planning a way back to me for a year before either of us said so out loud. I tend to start the story at the restaurant table. The night I sat down expecting a punchline and found someone who'd already written the next several chapters. Nothing had appeared out of nowhere. In the end, it had simply stopped being something either of us was willing to leave unplanned. What would you have done if you found out the blind date your coworkers set you up with as a joke had already decided exactly how the evening was going to go? And have you ever found out, later, that someone had been quietly planning their way toward you long before you noticed? Leave your answer in the comments. If this one stayed with you, a like and a subscribe means I'll keep making them. And I'll see you in the next one.